Die Kälte beißt wie ein Wolf. Wenigstens hält uns das Feuer am Leben.
The Germans called them Nachthexen, night witches. Not because of broomsticks or black cats, but because the only sound they made before dropping their bombs was a soft whooshing, like a broomstick cutting through the air. By the time you heard it, you were already dead. This is the story of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, an all-female Soviet aviation unit that terrorized the most powerful military machine in human history using planes made of plywood and canvas. Planes so primitive, so absurdly outdated, that they should have been death traps. Instead, they became nightmares. Over the course of World War II, these women flew more than 30,000 combat missions. They dropped 23,000 tons of bombs on German positions. They did it at night. They did it in open cockpits in temperatures that dropped to -40 degrees. They did it without parachutes, without radar, without radios, and for most of the war, without guns.
Comrades, the mission is clear. We move out at dawn. Check your gear and stay alert. Any questions?
And they did it by choice. This is a story about courage so extreme it borders on insanity, and about a group of women who proved that the deadliest weapon in war isn't technology, it's will. June 22nd, 1941. Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa. The largest military invasion in human history. 3 million German soldiers poured across the Soviet border in a wave of steel and fire. Within weeks, entire Soviet armies ceased to exist. Cities burned. Millions of soldiers were captured, killed, or simply vanished. The Soviet Union was bleeding out. In Moscow, a woman named Marina Raskova was receiving letters. Thousands of them. They came from factory workers, students, farmers, teachers, women from every corner of the Soviet Union. And they all said the same thing. Let us fight. Marina Raskova was already a legend. In 1938, she had set a world record for the longest non-stop flight by a woman, crash landing in the Siberian wilderness and surviving 10 days alone in the frozen taiga with nothing but a revolver and a chocolate bar. Stalin personally awarded her the Hero of the Soviet Union, the first woman to receive it. Now, with the motherland facing annihilation, Raskova took those letters straight to Stalin himself. Her pitch was simple. The Soviet Union was running out of men. Women were already working in factories, driving trucks, serving as medics. Why not let them fly? Stalin, a man not known for progressive gender politics, agreed. But not out of idealism, out of desperation. On October 8, 1941, Stalin issued Order Number 0099, authorizing the formation of 3 all-female aviation regiments. Every position would be filled by women: pilots, navigators, mechanics, ground crew, officers, everything. Within days, over 2,000 women volunteered. Most were in their teens and early 20s. Some were university students who had never touched a plane. Others were experienced civilian pilots from the Soviet flying clubs that had proliferated during the 1930s. They were given 2 weeks to learn what normally took 2 years. The woman chosen to command the Night Bomber Regiment was Yevdokia Bershanskaya, a calm, methodical pilot who would become one of the most respected commanders in the entire Soviet military. But even she must have stared at the equipment she was given and wondered if this was a suicide mission disguised as an honor. The aircraft they were given was the Polikarpov Po-2. Let me describe this plane so you understand exactly how insane this story is. The Po-2 was designed in 1928, not as a bomber, not as a fighter, but as a crop duster and flight trainer. It was a biplane. 2 sets of wings, held together with wooden struts and wire. The fuselage was plywood. The wings were covered in canvas, the same material you'd use for a tent. Its maximum speed was about 150 kilometers per hour. For context, a modern car on a highway goes faster. The standard German fighter, the Messerschmitt Bf 109, could fly at over 600 kilometers per hour. If a Messerschmitt spotted a Po-2 in daylight, the engagement wouldn't even qualify as a fight. It would be target practice. The Po-2 had an open cockpit. No canopy, no heating system. At altitude, in a Russian winter, temperatures could plunge to -40 degrees. The women flew in leather helmets and goggles, their faces smeared with grease to prevent frostbite. It didn't always work.
Come on, where's that checkpoint? This map is sticking to my face.
Navigators sometimes had to peel their maps off their own frozen skin. There was no radio, no radar. Navigation was done with a compass, a stopwatch, and a map, if you could read it in the dark with frozen fingers. And here's the detail that makes your stomach drop. For most of the war, they flew without parachutes. The reasoning was grimly practical. The planes flew too low for parachutes to deploy, and every kilogram saved meant another bomb they could carry. Each Po-2 could carry only 2 bombs, roughly 350 kilograms total. A single German heavy bomber could carry 10 times that. So to deliver any meaningful damage, the Night Witches had to fly multiple sorties every single night. Not 2 or 3. 8, 10, sometimes 18 missions in a single night. That meant flying to a target, dropping bombs, flying back, rearming, and doing it all over again. Sometimes spending 8 straight hours in the air, in an open cockpit in sub-zero temperatures. And they were expected to hit their targets in total darkness. The military establishment thought it was a joke. Male pilots called them Dunno's little sisters, a reference to a clueless cartoon character.
We need the aircraft ready by dawn.
Talk to the captain. We're busy.
This is ridiculous.
Keep walking.
Ground crews at shared airfields refused to service their planes. Officers made crude comments about women belonging in kitchens, not cockpits. The Night Witches didn't argue. They didn't complain. They just flew. And then they kept flying. And eventually, the laughing stopped. This is where the Night Witches earned their name. Their tactic was brilliantly simple and absolutely terrifying. They would fly toward their target in groups of 3. The first 2 planes would approach the target with engines running, drawing German searchlights and anti-aircraft fire toward them. They would split apart, banking in opposite directions, pulling the defensive fire with them, acting as decoys. While the Germans were focused on these 2 planes, the third would cut her engine. Complete silence. The Po-2 would glide, riding the air currents like a ghost, invisible in the darkness, making no sound except the whisper of wind over canvas wings. That faint whooshing was the only warning. German soldiers said it sounded like a witch's broomstick. The pilot would glide over the target, release her bombs at near point-blank range, then restart her engine and climb away into the night while the ground erupted in fire below. Then the 3 planes would rotate. The decoys became the bomber became a decoy. Over and over, all night long, it was psychological warfare as much as physical destruction. German soldiers began to dread nightfall. They knew the witches were coming, but they never knew when or from where. The silence was the worst part. You could hear an engine. You could track it. You could aim at it. But you can't shoot at silence. Sleep deprivation became a weapon. German troops stationed in sectors targeted by the Night Witches reported chronic exhaustion, jumping at every sound, firing wildly into empty darkness. Some units requested transfers specifically to escape the Night Witches. The German High Command was so frustrated by these attacks that they offered the Iron Cross, one of Germany's highest military honors, to any pilot who shot down a Night Witch. That's how seriously they took a bunch of women in plywood biplanes, and there was a cruel irony in the Germans' frustration. The very thing that made the Po-2 a terrible military aircraft made it almost impossible to shoot down at night. It flew too slowly for the German fighters. The Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs had a stall speed higher than the Po-2's maximum speed, meaning if they tried to slow down enough to target a Po-2, they would literally fall out of the sky. Trying to shoot one was like trying to swat a mosquito with a sledgehammer. The Night Witches had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest advantage. But for all their ingenuity, the Night Witches paid a staggering price. The Po-2 was made of plywood and canvas. It didn't just get damaged by anti-aircraft fire, it caught fire. Canvas burns, plywood burns, aviation fuel burns. A single tracer round could turn an entire aircraft into a torch in seconds. There was no ejection seat. For most of the war, there was no parachute. If your plane caught fire, you had two options: burn alive or jump. Many chose to jump. 32 women of the 588th died during the war. The youngest was 19. They were shot down, burned alive, crashed in fog, frozen in their cockpits. Some vanished into the darkness and were never found. Yevgenia Rudneva, a navigator, a mathematician, a woman who had dreamed of studying the stars, was killed when her plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire in April 1944. She was 23. Her diary was found in her quarters. The last entry read, "I want so much to live and to see this all end." Tatiana Makarova and Vera Balik, a pilot and navigator team, inseparable friends who had flown hundreds of missions together, were shot down over Poland in 1944. Their plane caught fire. Neither survived. They were 23 and 22. Galina Dokutovich, one of the regiment's most skilled navigators, died when her plane was caught in a searchlight and ripped apart by anti-aircraft fire. She was 21. Each loss was devastating in a way unique to this regiment. These women lived together, ate together, slept in the same dugouts, shared the same fears. They braided each other's hair before missions. They sang songs around campfires. They were sisters in every way that mattered. And then, every night, they climbed back into those plywood coffins and flew into the darkness again. The ground crews, all women, worked through the nights repairing planes with bare hands in freezing temperatures. They patched canvas wings with needle and thread. They loaded bombs by hand, each bomb weighing as much as a grown man. Some mechanics repaired so many planes in a single night that their hands bled and their fingers swelled shut. There was no rotation, no rest cycle, no psychological support. The regiment was expected to fly every single night that weather permitted, from 1942 until the end of the war. And they did. There's a detail that rarely makes it into the history books. The women decorated their planes. They painted flowers on the fuselages. They drew stars for every mission completed. They named their aircraft after fallen friends. In the middle of the most devastating war in human history, surrounded by death and destruction on an industrial scale, these women found ways to make their plywood bombers feel like home. Navigator Larisa Rozanova kept a small notebook of poetry in her flight jacket. Pilot Serafima Amosova taped a photograph of her younger sister to the instrument panel. Mechanic Sofia Ozerkova carved the names of every crew she repaired a plane for into the wooden frame of her toolkit. They were, in the end, not just warriors. They were young women, barely out of girlhood, carrying the weight of a nation's survival on their shoulders. And they carried it with a grace that the military bureaucracy, the propaganda machine, and the history books would never fully capture. By the end of the war, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment had flown over 30,000 combat sorties. They had dropped roughly 23,000 tons of bombs on German positions across the entire Eastern Front, from the Caucasus to Poland to the outskirts of Berlin itself. 23 of the regiment's members received the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest decoration in the Soviet military. The regiment itself was awarded the honorary designation Taman after the Taman Peninsula campaign, becoming the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. They were the most decorated female unit in Soviet aviation history. And yet, when the victory parade rolled through Red Square on June 24, 1945, they were not invited. The stated reason was that their aircraft, the Po-2, was too slow to fly in the parade formation. Too slow. The plane that had terrorized the Wehrmacht for 3 years. The plane that had flown 30,000 missions. The plane that had carried these women through fire and ice and darkness. Too slow. It was a bitter reminder of the reality these women had fought against their entire careers. They had proven themselves beyond any reasonable doubt, had earned more honors per capita than almost any unit in the Soviet military. And the establishment still couldn't quite bring itself to acknowledge them fully. But the Night Witches didn't fly for parades. After the war, most returned to ordinary lives. They became teachers, engineers, doctors, factory workers. They raised families. Some never spoke of the war again. Others couldn't stop talking about it. Not about the glory, but about the friends they'd lost. Nadezhda Popova, one of the regiment's most celebrated pilots who flew 852 combat missions, returned to her hometown to discover it had been completely destroyed. She became a flight instructor after the war and spent decades ensuring the regiment's story was preserved. Before her death in 2013, she said, "I sometimes stare into the blackness and close my eyes. I can still imagine myself as a young girl up there in my little bomber. And I ask myself, Nadia, how did you do it?" She never found an answer. For decades, the story of the Night Witches existed in a strange limbo. In the Soviet Union, they were acknowledged but not celebrated in the way you might expect. The Soviet narrative preferred collective heroism over individual stories, and the regime was uncomfortable with anything that complicated the official mythology of the Great Patriotic War, including the idea that women had been equal combatants. In the West, they were virtually unknown. The Cold War meant that Soviet military achievements were either ignored, minimized, or viewed with suspicion. Western military history focused overwhelmingly on the Western Front, on D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge and the RAF and the 8th Air Force. The Eastern Front, where roughly 80% of Germany's military casualties actually occurred, was a footnote. And within that footnote, the story of an all-female bomber regiment was invisible. It wasn't until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 that archives began to open and researchers began to piece together the full story. Books appeared. Documentaries were made. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the Night Witches began to receive something resembling the recognition they deserved. But even today, if you ask the average person about World War II heroes, they'll name Eisenhower, Churchill, Patton, maybe Zhukov if they're well read. They will not name Yevdokia Bershanskaya. They will not name Nadezhda Popova. They will not name Marina Raskova. And that, perhaps, is the final injustice. These women fought one of the most extraordinary campaigns in military history. They did it with equipment that belonged in a museum. They did it against the most powerful military force on the planet. They did it at night, in the cold, without the tools and protections that every other combat unit took for granted. And then, the world forgot about them. Until now. There's a sound that haunted German soldiers for years after the war ended. Not the scream of a Stuka dive bomber. Not the thunder of a Katyusha rocket barrage. Not the grinding treads of a T-34 tank. A whisper. The soft rush of air over canvas wings in the darkness. A sound so quiet, it could be mistaken for the wind, until the bombs fell. The Night Witches didn't have technology on their side. They didn't have firepower. They didn't have armor or speed or any of the things that are supposed to determine who wins and who loses in war. What they had was something that couldn't be measured on any spec sheet or tactical assessment. They had each other. They had a cause they believed in with every fiber of their being. And they had a ferocity that comes not from training or indoctrination, but from fighting for your home, your family, and your right to exist. They climbed into plywood death traps every single night for 3 years and flew toward people who were trying to kill them. They did it knowing that any mission could be their last. They did it knowing that if they were captured, their fate would be unspeakable. They did it knowing that even if they survived, the world might never know their names. They did it anyway. And in doing so, they proved something that still resonates 80 years later. That courage has no gender, that heroism has no age requirement, and that sometimes the most terrifying weapon on a battlefield isn't the biggest, the fastest, or the most advanced. Sometimes It's the one you never hear coming. The night witches are gone now. The last of them passed away years ago. Their planes have long since rotted back into the earth. Their airfields are overgrown. Their names are carved on memorials that fewer and fewer people visit. But if you go to those places on a still night, if you stand in the darkness and listen, you might hear it. A whisper, like a broomstick cutting through the air.